Hello, my name is Michael Stewart and I'm a writer. I've written for stage, radio and TV, but I've also authored 6 books. Here are some of my books here. My latest novel is called Ill Will. It's published by HarperCollins. This is the hardback. And it recounts Heathcliff's missing years. If you know the novel Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, you'll know in chapter 9, Heathcliff runs off in a storm and is missing for 3 years. When he returns, he's changed. He is wealthy, he's educated, and he has a sadistic streak he didn't have before. And I became fascinated by this missing time, and I imagined what had happened to him, and this led to this book. But this is actually part of a lifelong Bronte obsession, and I live in Thornton, where the Brontes were all born. And it became clear to me some years ago that Thornton often gets missed off the literary map. The focus is on Haworth, and to an extent that's rightly so. There's a fantastic museum there, and it's a beautiful town. But I wanted to acknowledge the link to Thornton, and this led me really to my Bronte Stones project, which involve 4 walks, one for each of the sisters, and then the linear walk, which connects Thornton to Haworth. It's a 9-mile walk over Thornton to Haworth, across the moors. It takes in a number of beauty spots and significant areas relating to the Brontes. Along this trail, I commissioned, in collaboration with Bradford Literature Festival in 2018, 4 of the most prominent writers to write tributes to the sisters. And we carved, I say we, the fine letter carver Pip Hall carved these tributes into 4 stones which are positioned along the journey. And those writers are the then Poet Laureate, Caroline Duffy, the author of Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, Jeanette Winterson, the Scottish Macker, Jackie Kay, which is their equivalent to our Poet Laureate, and the pop star, rock star, Kate Bush. It became clear to me that not only was Thornton left off the literary map, but also I could kind of add to the experience, if you like, by taking people on a walk which also replicates the chronology of their births. So as you go from Thornton, you start with the Charlotte Stone and you end with Anne, who was born last in Haworth. So it's quite a nice day out there. Let's not waste any more time. Let's start at the Old Bell Chapel. So our story starts here. This is the Old Bell Chapel in Thornton. This is what's left of it, a ruin. You can see from the date stones there that it was built in 1612. It was commissioned by a man called Richard Tempest, who was a knight of Henry VIII. But you can see also from those other date stones that there was a chapel even prior to that. And this is where Patrick Bronte comes in 1815 with his family to work as a curate. His family consists of, at that point, his wife Maria, his eldest daughter Maria, and their youngest Elizabeth, who was born a few months prior to that and was baptised here in this chapel. In fact, the baptismal font still exists. It's in St James's Church across the road. When Patrick came to this chapel, it was in a ruinous state, and the flags, the stone flags of the floor, were gaping holes, and the dead that were buried beneath, because it was the tradition then to bury the dead beneath the chapel. Apparently the stench of the dead was off-putting. So the first thing Patrick had to do was restore the chapel, really. You can see it faces Thornton Hall, and the 2 things were built around the same time. So Thornton Hall was where Richard Tempest lived, and he commissioned this chapel. When Patrick arrives, he's packing a pistol. Where he'd been before, at Hartshead, was the site of one of the key battles of the Luddites, the West Riding Luddites. And Cartwright's Mill was attacked. He was lodged just down the road from there, and he witnessed 100 armed men walked past his door carrying muskets, pistols, Enoch hammers and various other armaments. And we believe around this time he bought a pair of matchlock pistols which he carried with him throughout his life and fired every day. So he comes here and he works here for 5 years, and it is for Patrick a promotion of sorts. It's the first time he's not in paid lodgings. There's an actual parsonage that he's given to live in, and he also has for the first time some free time. It's roughly the same size parish as Hartshead, where he was previously, but there was about half the number of baptisms. My theory is it's to do with the amount of non-conformist religions in the area. But this gave him free time, and it was here really when he considered being a man of letters. He wrote 2 of his most literary works here, The Maid of Killarney and Cottage in the Woods. And he said of this place that it was the happiest point in his life. Really. The 5 years they spent here was the happiest time in his life. And we'll find out shortly why he felt that way. But just to say at this point that this was a man who came from an impoverished Irish background. He was born in 1777 in a place called Drumballaroonie, which is in County Down, now Northern Ireland. And he was the eldest of 10 children. His father was a farm labourer. And he went from there to be funded a scholarship at Cambridge to study theology. So he really was quite upwardly mobile and ambitious. And at this point, perhaps his ambition was also to become a novelist or a poet, but we'll see tragedy struck shortly afterwards. I'm standing outside the Bronte birthplace in Thornton. This is how it looked in 1815 when Patrick moved his family. When they moved in 1815, they were quite a small family with 2 children. You'll see that wasn't to be the case for very long. Charlotte came along in 1816, followed by Bramwell in 1817, Emily in 1818, and Anne in 1820. So they very quickly outgrew this parsonage, and this meant they had to move in 1820 to bigger premises. I mentioned before it was the happiest time. Patrick said this, he wrote this as well, that it was the happiest time in Thornton. And this is because tragedy struck almost immediately that they left Thornton in 1820. In 1821, his wife, Maria, died, and then a few years after, the 2 eldest daughters died, leaving just the 4 that we know today to reach adulthood. And this is where the very first Bronte stone is placed. This is the Charlotte stone, and it's actually a stone that's cut into the side wall of the birthplace. And it's a poem written by the then Poet Laureate Carol Ann Duffy. I wanted to have a stone of Charlotte here at the birthplace, with her being the eldest of the sisters, but also to mark that this house then, in 1815, would have marked the end of the village. This was the last house on this street. There were just 26 houses in the village. There were 6 pubs, 26 houses. There are now hundreds of houses and I think 3 pubs. So things have changed since then. But to also note, from here, there would have been a clear eye line from this room, from the bedroom here, to the Old Bell Chapel, which would have looked like that in 1815. And Charlotte would have been, in 1820, when they were still here, she would have been 4 years old. She would have had a living memory of that. She would be able to see from the window not only the place where her father worked, the Old Bell Chapel, but also behind it, the 3-storey estate home owned by Richard Tempest, Thornton Hall. Now, it's not unimaginable to see that as an influence, really, because, of course, in Jane Eyre, Rochester's house is called Thornfield Hall. And although the description doesn't match Thornton Hall, the name is in such close proximity, Thornton and Thornfield, that I like to think that perhaps even as early as then, Charlotte was drawing influences from this area. I'm standing in Thornton Cemetery. This is the location of the Bronte Stone. And here it is, here's the stone. This is a stone really to recognise the legacy of all the family. And on the stone is a poem written by the novelist Jeanette Winterson, who's the author of the novel Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, amongst many others. I've been asked by a few locals, why have we put a broken stone in this place? Rest assured it's not broken, it is made in that way, and if you read the poem you'll understand why. The poem references Anne Bronte's second novel, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and I think it's a good time actually just to think about the legacy of them as writers. Often people, when they recall the Brontes, they think of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, or they think about Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And the two novels that their younger sister wrote, Anne Bronte, Agnes Grey and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, often get forgotten about really, or left out. But just to say, I think right now at this time we are starting to recognise the importance of Anne's writing, and particularly that novel, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which, as it does, it talks about domestic abuse and female empowerment. It has a character, Helen Graham, who not only leaves her husband, her abusive partner, but takes her son with her, a thing which was illegal at that time. This is before the law was changed, and is a success. She's a successful artist in her own right, and has her own independent income. And so it was a radical text, and I think we're now finally starting to realise what a sort of proto-feminist and radical text it was, and is easily as good and as important as anything that Emily or Charlotte wrote. While we're also here, I just want to point out that all of these stones have been cut by the fine letter carver Pip Hall, and I want you to look when you're coming on the trail for Pip's signature. You'll see, and it's different on every stone, the initials of the poet and the date, but also Pip's encryption. There's a little sort of encrypted sign, so look for that symbol on each of the stones. So I'm just walking across Thornton Moor now, on the way to the Emily Stone. It's a wild and windy day, I'm sure Emily Bronte would approve. And I'm walking past Ogden Clough to the Kirk, which is where the Emily Stone is situated. Now, a lot of people write to me and say they can't find this stone, so hopefully, after you've seen this film, there'll be no excuse. In fact, it isn't that hard to find, I don't think. But just so you know, I'm going to take you down to it now. And it's just down here. This is Ogden Kirk, a huge outcrop of rock on the edge of Ovenden and Thornton Moor. And it's here where Pip Hall has carved Kate Bush's poem, the tribute to Emily Bronte. You can see the poem there carved into the rock face, fretted with verdant ferns, and you can see the initials KB for Kate Bush and the insignia I mentioned earlier, Pip Hall. And this stands almost exactly halfway between Thornton and Haworth. And in terms of the timeline, Emily sits halfway between Charlotte and Anne, born in 1818. Her bicentenary year, 2018, was also the it was also a celebration for Kate Bush, her debut single, Wuthering Heights. In 1978, in February, out of nowhere, this ethereal creature appeared on Top of the Pops, singing this song about Cathy and Heathcliff, inspired by Emily Bronte's book. And the song really set up Kate's career as a pop star, as a rock star. And I thought, of all the people that I wanted to write this tribute, Kate Bush was top of my pile. But I also thought, there's no way I'm going to get Kate Bush to agree to write this poem. So I'm very, very delighted and pleased that she agreed to do this. It so happens that Emily Bronte and Kate Bush share the same birthday. They're both born on the 31st of July. Not only that, on the 31st of July 2018, It was Emily Bronte's 200th birthday, but it was Kate Bush's 60th birthday, and also the 40th year celebration of her debut single. So this is particularly poignant. And I wanted a stone and a poem for Emily to be in the middle of nowhere, in a wild space on the moors. We know Emily loved the moors. She spent many hours, many happy hours, roaming the moors. And this is the perfect spot, really. Not only is this in a barren and remote location with a few ferns and heather, but not much else, but also this, during Patrick Bronte's time, was a popular Victorian picnic spot. And we know this because Elizabeth Firth, who's a neighbour of Patrick and his family, kept a diary, and she was friends with the family, and she wrote in her diary of a picnic that Patrick herself and the family came to have here in this exact spot. So I'm almost certain that Emily would have been aware of that. Patrick, her father, would have told her at some point in adulthood, and she would have sought out this spot, which is only a few miles across the moor to her home in Haworth. So it just feels like the perfect spot for lots of reasons. And it's my favourite location. On Friday, the 25th of May, 1849, Anne Bronte alighted the train at Scarborough with her only surviving sister, Charlotte Bronte, and their friend, Ellen Nussey. 3 days later, on Monday, the 28th of May, Anne Bronte was dead. She had a breakfast of boiled milk, and she was too weak to walk downstairs. She was carried downstairs. And her last words to her sister were, "Take courage." And she was buried at St Mary's Church above Scarborough. She's the only member of the Brontes who's not buried in that vault over there, inside or underneath the church in Haworth. The idea of this stone, the final stone in the Bronte Stones project, the Anne Stone, is yet again a tribute to Anne Bronte, but also it's a gesture, really. We're bringing her back home. We're bringing her back to Haworth, where she grew up, where she wrote most of her literary works. And also this stone triangulates these points. The parsonage there, where the family lived, the church there, where the family vault is, and her family members are buried, and this point here, overlooking the moors around Haworth. So this is the Anne Stone, the first stone to be carved by Pip Hall, the last stone to be laid, and it's by Jackie Kay. It's a poem by Jackie Kay, and that's the end of the trail, folks. So do experience this yourself. Come out onto the moors, get a map. I'll show you the maps. There are 4 of them. There's the Bronte Stones walk itself, which we've just done today, but we also have a walk for each of the sisters. There's a Charlotte walk, an Anne walk, and an Emily Bronte walk as well. They've been designed by a cartographer called Chris Goddard. Beautiful maps, you can see, in that hand-drawn tradition. And you can purchase them from the parsonage when it opens very shortly, from Emily's, the Bronte birthplace in Thornton, from Plenty, a cafe at South Square in Thornton, and various bookshops in Yorkshire, including the Bookcase in Hebden Bridge and the Book Corner in Halifax. That's about it, folks. Just to say thank you very much for listening and watching, and to thank my collaborators, the Bradford Literature Festival, the University of Huddersfield, who partly funded the map project, and, of course, the Bronte Parsonage and Museum and Society, who have helped along the way. Thank you very much.